Part 12. Rosetta Stone. Irvine, California, 4:01 p.m. Miles Dyson stood at the window on the top floor of the Monolith, a 3-story black basalt and glass building that was the sprawling headquarters and labs of Cyberdyne Systems, and watched the sun gleam off the tops of cars in the parking lot below. He yearned to return to his lab and the work waiting for him. The 3rd floor was the administration building, where the marketing and corporate executives worked. Dyson knew little of what they did, and cared even less. He was a practical, pragmatic man, intent on dissecting his little corner of the universe with his wits and his quarterly budget. The latter was up for review by the Cyberdyne Executive Board, and this was causing the former grave strain. Dyson was never much good with people outside his field of expertise. But lately, he'd had to come out of his pure research shell to deal with bureaucratic concerns. It was an intrusion he very much resented, however necessary. Miles Dyson was perhaps the most important man on the planet, perhaps even in history, although no one, not even Dyson, would ever guess such a thing. He was Special Projects Division Supervisor at Cyberdyne, a brilliant microphysicist and a chemist. But all he'd originally wanted to do was play basketball. The 6'2", rail-thin youth had graduated from an inner-city high school in Detroit, hoping to win a sports scholarship to a university in the West. But he wasn't a good enough player. Uncertain of what to do next, he talked to a guidance counselor who sensed hidden talents. She had him retake his SATs. He scored so high on math, he won a special federally funded scholarship to Caltech in Pasadena. This was a time when the United States was hungering for brilliant mathematicians to eventually compete with the Japanese. They bent over backwards to get anyone who showed any math talent into higher education. Dyson had been extremely dubious at first. Sure, he was comfortable with algebra, but it didn't juice him like a good game of hoops could. But after his first year at Caltech, he had realized a tremendous affinity for equations and formulae. At first, his professors had viewed him with skepticism. His social background, mediocre SAT scores in English and biology, and his still colourful inner-city colloquialisms branded him as a freak, an idiot savant. Perhaps there had been a touch of racism. At that time, Dyson walked, talked, and looked like the black youth from Detroit that he was. But later, as Dyson's facility expanded with his fascination for science, he became accepted into the inner circle of young geniuses on campus. He was wooed out of graduate school by Cyberdyne recruiters and put to work as a lowly lab tech, but on a remarkable and very secret project. Only 2 years later, he had shunted aside all his competitors and risen to project coordinator. And now, Cyberdyne had grown from a small, aggressive microchip firm to a mega-million-dollar corporation on the verge of a major breakthrough in artificial intelligence. Right now, Dyson just wanted to get back to work. The owner and CEO of Cyberdyne strode into the large glass and steel office. Greg Simmons had not aged gracefully in the 10 years since he'd founded the company. Beating off competitors and struggling to maintain control over the other board members, who were merely investors, had driven a couple of nails into his coffin. He was only 51, but he looked a decade older. His once thick shock of dark hair had turned thin and grey. Liver spots dotted his pale skin, and he walked with a slight limp from arthritis in his hip. He would live a lot longer, and become a lot wealthier before he died, but you wouldn't know it to look at him. Cancer patients looked healthier. The major blow to Simmons' peace of mind had happened 5 years ago, when his partner, a squirrely but brilliant young man named Jack Kroll, had died from a brain tumour. Kroll had been the real driving force behind the company's original success, and was on the verge of developing a completely new form of microchip called a wafer circuit. It would revolutionize the computer industry and make Simmons a billionaire. but the poor kid had died before he could complete his research. It had taken years to find the right replacement. Now, Simmons thought, he had it in the man who stood by the window. Dyson still looked like he was in his 20s, although he was 33. Despite his blue-collar appearance, Dyson had finally deciphered Kroll's last complicated notes, and was now carrying the research forward into new areas on his own intellectual steam. Instead of discovering the workings of individual circuits, Dyson was developing an understanding of the whole device. The only problem was, the man was a sieve with money. He wanted more and more staff members, and Cyberdyne had to pay top dollar to steal them away from the other top R&D firms. And the more people on the staff, the more difficult it was to maintain security. Dyson was well known for being casual in this regard. Many times Simmons had him on the carpet for security infractions. It was like scolding a child who held all the aces. For Dyson knew by now that Simmons was more salesman and money raiser than scientist. Although he could comprehend the end uses for the products his company was developing, he had little knowledge of how they were actually made. He was not a scientist. He was not even particularly smart. Oh, he'd been a draftsman and design tech for various little electronics firms, but his success was built on one particular thing: a peculiar stroke of fate. 10 years ago, Simmons had been working at Kleinhaus Electronics outside of Los Angeles, doing preliminary design charts on computer. One morning, he'd come into work and had to wait outside the building while the police scraped up a body from the factory floor. Evidently, there'd been an explosion the night before. 2 people, a man and a woman, had broken in for some reason and set something off. The man was killed, and the woman supposedly went nuts. Once he was let in, Jack, who had been his assistant back then, brought him a strange piece of microcircuitry. His curiosity had driven him to sneak across the police line and grab some of the more interesting pieces of debris from the explosion. It was like no other technology either Simmons or Kroll had ever seen. Rather than turn it over to Kleinhaus, they quit their jobs, borrowed up to their eyeballs, and opened their own company. They called it Cyberdyne. The first 2 years, they had nearly starved, just trying to figure out what they had found. Eventually, Jack Kroll had begun to decipher the workings of one tiny circuit loop, which, like an electronic Rosetta Stone, pointed the way to other minor but profitable discoveries. The company successfully marketed a new accelerator chip. They were in healthy profit for the 3rd and 4th years. And then Kroll got the tumor. He worked feverishly, scribbling notes in a drug-induced daze, but died before he could reach the next breakthrough. Now there was Dyson, also on the verge, but eating the company's profits as if they were popcorn. Simmons cleared his throat, and Dyson nervously faced him. "Sorry it took so long," Simmons said. "But the other members of the board were confused about some of the line items on your budget." Before Dyson could make a fuss, Simmons held up his hand. "Don't worry, I wiped away some of the fog." An idle bluff, thought Dyson. He knew the old man didn't know what his own R&D was really up to, but Simmons could smell a killing a mile off, and Dyson warily waited for him to close in. Simmons offered him a drink of scotch. Dyson politely declined. He had to wait while Simmons gulped down his. Finally, the old man grinned. "Well, you've got your budget for the next quarter. I had a hell of a time justifying it to the others. They want results we can market by the end of the year. I assured them you would validate my confidence in you. So do me a favor and don't spend it all in one spot." The laughter between them was forced. They weren't friends. You have to have a basic understanding of one another to be friends, and these two men were far apart in almost all aspects. Except the Special Projects Division. And even then, they each had different objectives in mind. Dyson wasn't above enjoying his high salary, but he wasn't in it for the money. He just wanted to know. And if in the process of knowing he could make the world work a little better for his children, then fine. Simmons just wanted more of what he already had. In a way, they were both obsessed men. Dyson thought he was the happier man. He shook Simmons' hand and promised to personally keep him posted on his division's progress. As quickly as he could, Dyson left and hurried into the elevator. Alone in the carpeted cubicle, he made a triumphant leap. He'd been certain most of his requests would be turned down. Obviously, he'd underrated Simmons' passion for Special Division and their current project. Now he'd gotten everything he wanted to complete his work. It wouldn't be long before they would leap the final hurdle and know all there was to know about Lot 2. The doors whispered open on the second floor. Dyson walked across the maroon foyer to a solid security door. A chrome sign above it read, Special Projects Division, authorized personnel only. He zipped his electronic keycard through the scanner. The door unlocked with a clunk. He entered the AI lab. The place was filled with banks of processors, disk drives, test bays, and prototype assembly areas. Everywhere, thick cables snaked across the floor. A layman wandering through the clean but cluttered lab might think it was a slightly sloppy phone company switching station. Dyson strode to the center of the room and turned to eager faces. "Greetings, troops. You're getting your pay raises." Jokingly, his colleagues saluted and cheered. There was not a lab coat in sight. This was strictly a jeans and sneakers crowd, all young and bright like Dyson. They sat at their consoles drinking Pepsis, eating lunches out of fast food bags, and changing technology as the world knew it. And now they clapped their boss on his back and shook his hand. Dyson settled everyone down and told them to punch out early. There was a general groan. Nobody ever punched out early. The competition among the techs and assistants was fierce. The man who left his desk first was considered a pariah. Not only did some of the research staff work 6-day weeks, they often worked late on Saturdays. These people were not looking forward to getting laid or taking the family to a movie. They wanted what Dyson wanted, the answer to fascinating questions, and the power to change the world. Bryant, one of the more brash young lab assistants, rushed over to Dyson. "Mr. Dyson, the materials team wants to run another test on Lot 2 before they wrap up." "Yup, come on, I'll get it." Bryant had to hustle to keep up as Dyson quickly crossed the lab. "Listen, Mr. Dyson, I know I haven't been here that long, but I was wondering if you could tell me, if you know." "Know what?" "Well, where it came from." "I asked that question once. Know what I was told? Don't ask." Dyson waved to the guard outside the vault room door. He followed Dyson and Bryant into the small room and stood with them before what looked like a high-tech bank vault. Like the launch controls in a nuclear silo, it required 2 keys to open. The guard and Dyson inserted their keys and turned them simultaneously. Dyson then typed in a passcode on a keypad mounted in the wall. A moment later, the vault unlocked itself with a sequence of sharp snicks. The door swung open, and Dyson went inside. Bryant stayed outside with the guard, who noted Dyson's name and the time on a clipboard. Alone in the vault, Dyson walked to a stainless steel cabinet and opened it. Inside was a small artifact in a sealed container of inert gas. Marked Lot 2. In it was a ceramic rectangle, about the size of a domino, the colour of liver. It had been shattered, painstakingly reconstructed, and mounted on a metal frame. In that speck of technology was a mystery that had already netted Cyberdyne millions of dollars. And there was more. The circuit design and materials used were totally alien to any known to Dyson. The other question nagged at him again, brought up by Bryant, and in the past by himself. Where, indeed, had it come from? Who had originally built the circuit? The Russians? Unlikely. The designs were too delicate. The Japanese? A possibility, but why hadn't there been similar technology developed overseas in the last few years? No, this was a one-of-a-kind thing. Dyson couldn't believe it came from the mind of the old man, and Jack Kroll took the secret with him when he died. There was no evidence of where the strange circuit chip originated in his notes. But Dyson had other, more answerable questions to deal with. That was his life now. He reached in and removed the chip, still in its inert gas flask, and set it on a specially designed cart, handling it like the Turin shroud. As he closed the cabinet, his eyes fell on the adjacent one. It was labelled Lot 1. If Bryant and the others only knew what was behind that door. Only 3 people did, and one was dead. The other was the owner of the company. The third was Dyson. He impulsively unlocked the cabinet and glanced inside at a larger object. A mechanically intricate metal hand and forearm. At the elbow, the metal was twisted and crushed, but the forearm and hand were intact, although the chrome surface was slightly scorched and discoloured. It stood upright in its vacuum flask, as if saluting. Dyson stared at it, lost in thought. Who the hell had made this? Don't ask. A moment of dread passed through him, like indigestion. Lot 1 and 2 could have been stolen. He didn't trust Greg Simmons. What if... But then the rational part of his mind balked. The doubt was reduced to its component parts and locked in a compartment for later contemplation. Maybe they were stolen. Maybe they were created under a secret government contract. Once he had opened up the final secret of Lot 2, he thought he might know. Until then. Reluctantly, he closed the cabinet and locked it up tight.